Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Giant Conversations. For those of you that are just coming in, you are in the right spot. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, we're going to get started here in about 4 or 5 minutes, right at 6 o'clock. But as we are waiting for everybody to come in, if everybody wants to go ahead and send a message in the chat to let us know that you are here and say hi and let us know where you're from. We would love to get to know you a little bit as we're waiting for the webinar to start. So again, welcome everybody to Giant Conversations. Thanks so much for joining us. Send us a quick hi in the chat. Let us know your name and where you're coming in from tonight. Looks like we're getting a lot more people coming in. For everybody that has just joined us, this is Giant Conversations. We're going to be talking about fire and giant sequoias in the Sierra Nevada. So if that is the area that you are, or the conversation that you're a part of tonight, you are in the right spot. As you come in, please send us a chat and let us know your name and where you're coming in from. Greetings, Lanny from Oregon. Ray from Southern California, thanks so much for joining, Ray. And for those of you that are new to Zoom, if you click the chat box at the bottom of your screens, you'll be able to interact on the chat. It will pop up and you'll be able to message everybody. Good job, Tiffany from Oxford, Mississippi. Thanks for coming in today. And Rodney from the Remote Sensing Lab for McKellen Park in California. And then we have Serena from SoCal. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining. And everybody who is coming in, this is Giant Conversations. We're going to be talking about fire and giant sequoias in the Sierra Nevada. We've got a great panel tonight. We're going to get started here in just a couple of minutes, starting right at 6 o'clock. We're going to give people just a couple minutes to join in and get settled in. And for those of you that have just joined us, if you can go ahead and send us a chat in the box and let us know your name and where you're from. We would love to get to know you a little bit. Lee from Visalia, welcome. We've got Tiffany from UC Davis. And then Sydney from Hiking My Feelings. Hey, Sydney, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes. We're going to give people just another couple minutes to join in. We've got quite a few people still getting in. Thank you everybody for joining. This is Giant Conversations. We're going to be talking about fire and giant sequoias in the Sierra Nevada. It's going to be a great conversation tonight. We've got some great panelists. I want to say thank you to everybody that has joined tonight. We're really excited that you're here. We're excited for you to be a part of the conversation. And to get our conversation started, if you can send us a quick hi in the chat, let us know your name and where you're from. We would love to see where you're all from. And when you're typing in the chat, just a quick lesson on Zoom is that when you see the to phrase, you want to make sure that it is clicked to everybody. So that way everybody can see your chat. If you click on the button that says, it might say panelist or host, you want to make sure that everyone is clicked so that way we can all see where you're from. Hi, Rodney, great to see you. Thanks for coming in. Erica, glad you can make it. Thanks for coming in. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started here in just a minute. We are still welcoming quite a few visitors in. So again, for all of those who have joined, this is Giant Conversations. We're going to be talking tonight about fire and giant sequoias, and we are excited to get this conversation going. As we start, if everybody can take a minute to let us know, to say a quick hi in the chat, let us know where you're from. We would love to get to know you as you are a very important part of this giant conversation tonight. So welcome everybody. Bill from Jericho, Vermont. Vermont, awesome. Teresa from San Diego, Jim from Calaveras Big Tree State Park, thanks. Homelands of the Central Sierra, awesome. Thanks for joining, Jim. And thank you everybody that has joined tonight. We're really excited about this giant conversation. We have a great panel tonight, and we're gonna go ahead and get started. My name is Katie Whiteman. I'm the Field Institute Director for the Sequoia Parks Conservancy here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. We are actually the nonprofit partner to Sequoia and Kings Canyon. And throughout the night, you might hear me say the phrase SPC. And what SPC stands for is actually the Sequoia Parks Conservancy. I had a bunch of questions last conversation about what does SPC mean? And I use that phrase a lot throughout the evening, and that just stands for Sequoia Parks Conservancy. And I am not the only one here from SPC. There's actually a whole team of people here tonight that are working in the background and will be interacting with you via chat. We've got our executive director here, Savannah Boiano. We also have our communications director, Gary Rogers, our philanthropy director, Tamara Marks, and our finance director, Christy Goldstone. And I can't say enough how grateful I am for their help tonight. It really does take a village to run a nonprofit organization in the national parks. And we're so grateful to be working with people like Andrew and Christy and Scott that are so vital to the National Park Service. And we're excited to get this conversation going. Tonight on our panel, we're going to be talking about fire and giant sequoias here in the Sierra Nevada. And I can't think of three better people to really lead this conversation tonight. And we have tonight here Dr. Christy Brigham. Christy Brigham is the Chief of Resource Management here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. She actually received her doctorate degree in ecology from the University of California, Davis. I think we have some UC Davis folks here tonight, I saw on the chat, in 2001. And she has worked as a scientist and manager for the National Park Service since 2003 and has been the leader of resource management here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon since 2015. Christy has a deep love for trees in general and giant sequoias in particular, and I can attest to how much she really does love these trees, and has been actively involved in giant sequoia research, management, and monitoring since 2015. We also have tonight Dr. Scott Stevens. And Dr. Scott Stevens has his PhD in wildland resource science and currently teaches at the University of California, Berkeley. And his work focuses on the interactions of wildland fire and ecosystems. This includes how prehistoric fires once interacted with the ecosystems and how current wildland fires are affecting ecosystems and how future fires and management may change this interaction. He is also interested in wildland fire and forest policy and how it can be improved to meet the challenges of the next decades, and how fire will be affected by climate change in a new area of research. And so Dr. Stevens has been working a lot here in the Sierra Nevada and Sequoia and Kings, and we're so lucky to have him here tonight. Thank you so much, Dr. Stevens. And lastly, we have a fuel specialist manager, Andrew Cremers. Andrew is a Minnesota native who has served as a fuel technician in Sequoia and Kings Canyon since 2016. And he became the fuel specialist in 2021. Prior to that, he served 10 years on the Springville Hotshots in Sequoia National Forest, and also spent multiple fire seasons assigned to Helitack and Type 3 engines used for wildland firefighting. And so Andrew brings such a huge amount of knowledge of on the ground fuel knowledge in these parks. And I'm so excited that he was able to join us tonight to give us such a unique perspective of fire as it relates to the Sierra Nevada and the giant sequoias. And so Andrew, Christy, and Scott, thank you all so much for being with us tonight. We're really, really excited about this conversation and excited to have you all here. Now, before we begin tonight, we do have a special message from our executive director, Savannah Boiano. We wanted to share her inspiring words with you as an introduction to really what is a very, very giant conversation. So we're going to go ahead and show that message now.
Hello and welcome to Giant Conversations. My name is Savannah Boiano, Executive Director of Sequoia Parks Conservancy. Over the last couple of months, Sequoia Parks Conservancy has really been thinking about the role of conversation in affecting positive change for our national parks. And over the coming months, this webinar series will include you in the conversations about some of the most pressing issues facing Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. And so thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the series.
Savannah does such a great job at articulating this idea that national parks aren't just a place where we go hiking or backpacking or climbing or doing all these things, but it really is a platform where we can come together and talk about really important subjects like fire. And so just want to say thank you again for everybody for experiencing your national parks in a different way tonight and engaging with the national parks in a way where we talk about hard things like fire. And tonight we're going to go ahead and launch into our topic of fire and start that really giant conversation. Now, before we start our conversation tonight, I just want to go over a couple different expectations for the evening. We will have a variety of ways for everybody to participate in a conversation because, again, this is a conversation. And we want to make sure that you as audience members have an opportunity to interact and to also share your questions and ideas with our panelists. And you will have the opportunity tonight to answer 3 polling questions so that we get to know you just a little bit more. We'll also have 3 times for a designated Q&A. And we do ask that you do use the Q&A button on the Zoom feature. Please do not put any questions in the chat. We won't be monitoring the chat for questions. All the questions that we'll ask the panelists tonight will be drawn from that Q&A box. So please type your questions into that Q&A box. And we do ask that in order to preserve everyone's experience tonight and to preserve the conversation, we do ask that you bring your respectful comments, your respectful ideas, and your respectful questions. And if we do feel that someone is being disrespectful, we will remove those people from the webinar just to preserve everybody's experience. I don't think that's going to happen tonight, but we wanted to let you know up front. Now, on that note, we're going to go ahead and get started in our first polling question. And what I really want to know before we get started is I want to ask this question to everybody. I want to know who has been to Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park. So you're going to see a polling question pop up on your screen, and you're going to click yes or no. Have you been to Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks? Going to give everybody a minute or 2 to answer the question. So who has been to Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks? Let us know, yes or no. And of course, no, you've always wanted to, right? If you haven't been. All right, let's go ahead and display those results to see how many people have been to Sequoia and Kings Canyon. Wow, I did not expect that. It looks like 92% of people. So out of the almost 90 people who are here, 92% of you have been to Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. And we've got 8% who I am very excited to. Hopefully you guys will be able to come and visit and see these big trees and this special place yourself. So awesome. Thank you everybody for letting us know if you've been to the parks. So almost 2 million people a year come to Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. And most people come to the parks with the goal of seeing, the giant sequoias. These are the largest trees in the world by trunk volume. And people come from all over the planet just to see these trees. And I think by far one of my most favorite things to witness in visitors when they come to the parks is they realize just how much is in these 2 parks alone. A lot of people come for the giant sequoias, but when they get here, they realize that these parks are huge, that not only do we have giant sequoias and Kings Canyon, which is one of the deepest canyons in the lower 48 states, but they also learn that 80% of our park is designated wilderness. And throughout the parks, we have not only dense montane forests, but we also have oak woodlands, we have cave systems, we have wetlands, and this incredible alpine landscape where I think that you can find every color in the world in that alpine landscape. It's amazing. And the park is rich in resources, but what experience, like visitors experience today, is a lot different than they would have experienced in 1890 when the park was established over 100 years ago. So the park that we see now in 2022 versus the park that was established in 1890 are two different things. So they look different. And a big reason for that difference centers around fire and the fire's natural role in the landscape. And the story of fire in these parks is as interesting and also as diverse as the parks themselves. And it's also a complicated story. And I couldn't think of three better people to help us navigate the story of fire in Sequoia and Kings Canyon in the Southern Sierra Nevada than Dr. Christy Brigham, Dr. Scott Stevens, and field specialist Andrew Cremers. And our first question tonight is actually for Christy. And it focuses on that idea of the differences we see in the forest today as opposed to 100 years ago. So Christy, can you explain why the Southern Sierra Nevada and here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon looks different now than it did 100 plus years ago when the parks were first established?
Sure, Katie. Thanks for asking that question. You did such a great job providing beautiful visual descriptions of the parks. I want to start there. So I want to touch on briefly three things. What the differences you might have seen had you wandered through these forests in the 1890s, early 1900s, why we think those differences are that way, and how we know that. And that how will be a great transition for Katie's next question to Dr. Stevens. So if you had strolled through these forests, the sequoia groves and their surrounding mixed conifer in the late 1800s, early 1900s, you would have noticed the presence of a couple things. You would have been able to see long distances. So you notice in Katie's background, you can still see pretty far, but it gets dense pretty quickly. So you would have noticed, and we talk about that as an open stand structure. So you could see really long distances. And you would have noticed patches within that of younger trees mixed in with bigger, older trees. And that's showing you that that forest is actively regenerating and showing you what we call a patch mosaic of different sizes and different vegetation structures. And two things that you would not have seen would be really dense thickets of young trees with dead branches, what we call ladder fuels that can carry fire from the ground into the canopy. And you would not have seen heavy piles of fallen trees, lots of large logs, jackstrawed, big piles of logs on top of each other. So why, what's changed? And the primary thing that has changed is fire suppression. So we didn't know it when my European ancestors came and wandered through these forests, but fire has been shaping these landscapes for millennia. A lot of lightning fire and also some tribal burning, cultural burning. And that these forests are what we call frequent fire forests. And when fire burns through them frequently, it removes those ladder fuels. It creates these small openings where you get that regeneration that giant sequoias really rely on. And so removal of that fire successfully by us, because we wanted to protect these forests that we loved from a process that we perceived as destructive, actually changed the structure of the forest to disastrous consequences, unfortunately. And those changes have really been made worse by the addition of climate change and some impacts of logging in the past, removal of certain kinds of tree removal in the past. So why am I saying that it's fire and fire suppression? How do we know that? There are a lot of different lines of evidence, and Dr. Stevens is one of the experts in this field and has generated a lot of this evidence. So there's old forest stand inventories that actually measured tree densities. There are old photographs. There are written records and observations of how smoky it was, the kinds of fires that burned, what the forest looked like. There are fire scars in tree rings that tell us how frequently fires burned. And there's the structure of the vegetation at the time that we saw. And then on top of that, we also have comparison systems where we have maintained wildfire in some areas with more lightning fire occurring, and in different areas of the country and the world where we did not suppress fire. And when we look at those systems, we see a system that looks similar to what we saw in the 1890s. So that's just a broad brush introduction to some of the changes and what we think the primary drivers are and the evidence that has pointed us in that direction. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, no, thank you, Christy. That was a great picture of that. And yeah, it leads me to my next question for Dr. Stevens. And Christy talks about kind of that change structure of the forest. And can you explain the difference in the forest today that have not seen fire suppression in comparison to the current status of the Southern Sierra Nevada?
No, that's an interesting question. And I really appreciate Christy really setting kind of the stage very, very nicely. Just as we heard, when you take fire out, the process of fire used to burn every 8, 15 years, 10 years. That fire had an enormous impact on our forests. It basically was able to recycle nutrients, keep regeneration patchy, as Christy elaborated, not uniform, and created much more open conditions that then enabled a lot of things to happen. Like when a drought happened, you didn't have catastrophic mortality. You didn't have bark beetle attack that basically would just overwhelm systems like we saw in 2012 to 2016. So it had this inherent character that was able to be resilient to many stressors. And climate change is making it worse. There's no doubt about it. Climate change is a big factor. But I still feel that it really is a current forest condition that is the biggest factor, because the biggest factor really still becomes this current forest condition. There's a couple old photos I was going to show you just briefly here from the Sierra National Forest. Maybe we can pull one of those up if possible. And here you see a mixed conifer forest from the early 1900s in the Sierra National Forest, pretty close to Sequoia Kings Canyon. And here you can see that great picture that Christy just talked about. You can see behind, but you also see some patches. And here's another one in Ponderosa Pine, where you got a lot of shrubs on the understory, maybe bear clover, and you have this incredible kind of larger trees with patches of regen. One place that I always go in my mind, I've been working, and the photos are okay now, thank you, that's fine. But there is a place today where you can go in a national park in Mexico, the Sierra San Pedro Martir National Park in the Peninsular Mountains. It's about a 5-hour drive from San Diego. And it's Jeffrey Pine mixed conifer. The neat thing about that place is it didn't have fire suppression until 1970, and it's never been harvested. When you go there today, those pictures we just looked at from the early 1900s in the Sierra National Forest, the forest structure is amazingly similar. And the data from some of these historical standard reconstructions that Christy mentioned, we have one from the Greenhorn Mountains. The Greenhorn Mountains a little bit south of Sequoia Kings. It's right on the end of the Sierra Nevada. You look at those four characteristics in 1915, 1911 from the Greenhorn Mountains, they align incredibly similarly to what's in the Sierra San Pedro Martir today. So it gives us this idea of just what these systems are like today and also in the past. And as Christy said, we've really changed. We've gone from something like maybe in the Martir, 60 trees per acre, and it varies from maybe 30 to maybe 100. And today in a lot of forests in our mixed conifer zone, we're at maybe 200 to 400 trees per acre. Some places I've measured 1,000. So, this has really changed this system to a point when you add climate change to it, unfortunately, they become so vulnerable. But there is hope. Maybe that's all I can say to now.
No, I love that, Dr. Stevens. Yeah, there's always that element of hope. And I think that when we talk about fire, sometimes it can get overwhelmingly sometimes bleak in some ways. It can be a kind of scary conversation. And I think that your concept of that idea of the forest condition, and that yes, it's changed, and yes, it's like climate change has affected that. And current forest conditions have affected that. But I love that you talk about that idea of like hope too, that we don't necessarily have to end that story there. And Andrew, I'm curious, as the fuel management specialist in the parks, we've talked a little bit about kind of a historical perspective and how the landscape has changed. And as Dr. Stevens talked about, like the differences in the current forest condition, I'm curious to what you see as the current threat to the Sierra Nevada and the giant sequoias from a fuel management specialist perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. That's a good question. And thanks for having me. And I saw there was north of 66 people on the that checked in there. So thanks to everybody for showing up. That's really cool. Scott, thanks for talking about forest condition, because all things aside, the forest has to be resilient. And the Sierras that I work in, Central South Sierras, they're just at risk top to bottom because of all the new norms. The size and the scale of the fires and the frequency obviously do damage. They stress the forest. The entire range is at risk. And giant sequoias, we're talking giant sequoias here, they live in that lower montane zone, which is mixed in with montane chaparral. This is volatile stuff. That's where all of our bark beetle comes to fore in the ponderosa pines and the sugar pine. So it's a tough mix in that elevation range, and sequoias live right there. So everything I'm talking about goes from top to bottom across the range. So you know, as a firefighter, I'll zoom in a little bit just for why some of the reasons why these fires are, their suppression difficulty is a big thing that we experience. So why did they get big? They get big because there's a lot of them. They get big because of climate change. There's also things when you zoom in, you talk about the tree mortality. Gary, if you can go to, I think it's picture 1, if you could. If folks are able to see that, this is just a picture of a colony fire when we first flew over it. That's not an extraordinary amount of snags in this picture. There's a heck of a lot more, but this is everything you're looking at. Yeah, the first one is just a quick flyover snapshot of the colony. This tree mortality creates an immediate no work zone for firefighters. They immediately have to pull back. The colony started in one of the more extraordinary pockets of tree mortality in our entire park. They flew over it once and they had to pull back to change their tactics. So that's our example. There's always tree mortality. There always has been. Just the scale changes the strategy from the get-go. And I'll stay on suppression difficulty. All this stuff leads to different fire intensities. That second picture would be good, Gary, right now. So just fire intensity. In my career, I came out to California after the National Fire Plan in the early 2000s came into play. That's when we built up all of our staffing. They called it the maximum efficiency level buildup. They built up the workforce in fire. And we had a sufficient workforce, but that was also before the drought. Once a drought started showing up, a lot of the stuff that, you know, Scott works on and Christy knows about, like the fire regime is changing. There's different characteristics of fire. There's different seasonality. There's different intensities and different effects that happen. So, you know, up on the Dixie fire this last summer, that's just one example of a fire that a timber fire that was extremely difficult to contain in mid-July in Northern California when resources were stressed. So when the size and scale is what we're experiencing, when it manifests on the ground, suppression difficulty goes way up. You used to fight fire for a couple weeks. There's some fires that were larger than other ones. You'd eventually get the folks you needed, and then you could implement your strategy and then get it done and move on to the next one. The last few years, those resources just kind of aren't showing. And you need to do safely. And the risk profile really hasn't changed as far as that goes. But what I remember, you know, kind of talking about when the fires occur and things like that, you know, when I was my first few years on the hotshot crew, we'd show up in Southern California later on in the year when the chaparral would be burning, and we'd fight fire for a couple weeks, get resources and put it out. And now we're fighting fire in the timber in July, and multiple fires and things like that. So all that stuff kind of stacks up, you know, leads into fire size and things like that.
And Andrew, I love
and a
that.
lot of this.
I love, Andrew, that you talk about that idea of that kind of narrowing in on what it is to, when we talk about, you know, the current threat you see to the Sierra Nevada and the giant sequoias, you kind of focus in on that very real aspect of fire, of tree mortality, of the fire regime changing, and that idea of suppression difficulty. And I think that is a really key aspect to the story of fire. We sometimes we can focus too much on the science, and there's also this other aspect of like that practical of fighting fire, and what does that look like on the ground. And I want to just thank you so much for bringing that side of this story forward. And we're going to hear more from Andrew here in just a little bit, but before we hear more from Andrew and Christy and Scott, I want to have the opportunity to open it up to all of our participants. We've talked a lot, believe it or not, we've talked a lot in the last 20 minutes about fire. We want to make sure that we do maintain a conversation. So we do want to open it up for some question and answer time. So right now is, before we move on to our next set of questions, before we delve a bit deeper into the story of fire in the Sierra Nevada, we want to open it up for some questions. And so if you have any questions for Dr. Stevens or Dr. Brigham or Andrew about what they just talked about, please go ahead and put it in that question and answer box, and we will open it up for some quick Q&A. And again, please put all your questions in the chat. And so our first question comes from John Rasmussen, and he says that he has seen the term healthy/unhealthy forest more frequently. And he wants to know, is there a scientific description of this term, and where, why are we seeing those two terms? And whoever wants to take that question.
I can take a quick crack at that, and then Scott can jump in and fix everything I say wrong. So as my friend and Sequoia expert, Dr. Nate Stevenson likes to say, that term healthy is really a minefield, because it depends on what you value, what values you're looking for in the forest. And that's a human perspective. We had tried to move away from that term within the management community, and instead spent a lot of time looking at what we call natural range of variation for things like fire and stand structure, with the idea that those are the conditions that these systems evolved with, and staying closer to that would make these forests more resilient and resistant to other changes. But health is something that people relate to, and so it is a common lens. For us in the National Park Service, we are very focused on trying to manage our landscape in a way that allows it to change and adapt slowly to changing conditions. So we're trying to avoid catastrophic changes, the kinds of things that we've seen with the drought, with 5.8 million dead trees in our parks, or with catastrophic wildfire. So it is a difficult concept, and it really relies on what your values are and trying to be clear in what you're speaking to. Scott, clarifications?
No, I think you did really, really nicely there, because, the idea of health is something like you just say, of course, we talk about that with all of our friends, our families, but a forest, as Christy talks about, with just natural range of variation, fire was always killing trees, so death was part of life, just like it is for us, unfortunately, so you're thinking about the scale of death, the size of patches, and then certainly the size of regeneration. So all that in that quote unquote healthy forest, I prefer, like Christy said, natural range of variation. There's a process working there that enables forests to go into the future. And if we can get a forest in that kind of condition, even with climate change, it's going to change things as we go forward. But still, you probably have pretty good idea that you're going to maintain that forest ecosystem. So it really is a nice way to think about it, kind of the variation and the ability of these systems to work, and including fire, including tree death, including regeneration. So I think that was well done, Christy.
Thank you both. And I just want to let everybody know we've got so many questions here, and And I do want to let you know we will have 2 other opportunities for question and answer. And I'm sorry if I can't get to all the questions, but the next question I have is actually a really good question. And I think that, you know, Christy or Scott or Andrew, either one, any of you can answer this question, but Sorith, I'm sorry if I pronounce her name wrong. Sorith asks, just to be clear, are you saying that fire suppression has had a downside in the forest in the last 100 years? And so if Scott, do you want to take that question?
Sure, I'll say a couple of things, maybe pass it on to the panelists here, but it sure has. It has, there's just no doubt. When you look at what suppression's done, you know, Andrew alluded to some of these issues around even managing fire. If you're in a snag field and you can't even put people inside because snags fall down and kill people, very dangerous. So, you know, so when you think about the way forests has changed, early foresters, I've read a lot of their papers from the early 1900s. They came to the forests of the Sierra Nevada, and I showed you a couple of those old photos. They looked at that thing and they said, you know what, there's too much open space. We need more trees per acre. We need actually the ability to generate more wood and more values for the American public. And they thought that fire correctly was reducing tree density and keeping it low. So when they saw that, they just started to think about what to do. And they decided, well, we're going to just take fire out as best we can. We're going to get more trees per acre. We're going to do better for the American people. And lo and behold, they were pretty good at it. So that started around the early 1900s and went through for a long time. The National Park Service, to its credit, started changing fire policy in '68. In fact, Sequoia Kings Canyon was literally the leader and began to say, we got to do something about this. So yes, suppression has really created forest conditions that have no analogy anytime that we can even point to. I don't know if Andrew or others want to say anything, please.
Completely agree is all I can say to that.
All right, and another question comes to us from one of our audience members named Hillary, and she asked a good question kind of about past, kind of the past Sierra Nevada. And she asks, how easily did fires extinguish themselves when they occurred spontaneously in the past? And were there any problems with dangerous prolonged burns, you know, say 100 years ago versus what we're seeing now?
I'm just happy to say something, and please, Christy and others say the same. You know, we've been working in the Sequoias cousin, Yosemite. So Yosemite's just up the road a ways, you know, and Yosemite, like Sequoia, in the early 1970s, late 60s, allowed lightning fire to actually come back into some of the wilderness areas. And still today, managers like Andrew and others are working to get that fire back in these systems. And it's hard. I have to tip my hat to managers because I know it's hard, because I've been on a few fires over the years, and it's hard to manage a fire for resource benefit, or what we're going to call it. But in Yosemite, a place called Illilouette Creek Basin. Illilouette Creek Basin is a big part of the upper Merced watershed. So of course, Merced River goes right through the valley, right? So Illilouette is a part of that. And that turns out to be an incredible place for lightning fire since 1972. And since 1972, that area is about 40,000 acres. There's been about 40 fires, 50 fires in there, lightning fires that have burned. About 3/4 of those fires have been allowed to burn with careful monitoring from the park. About a quarter have been suppressed for a lot of different reasons, smoke management, other things. But the neat thing about Illilouette is we've seen the jigsaw puzzle of the fires basically burning next to each other, burning over each other, and that whole tapestry of fire in that place. You can get to Illilouette so easy. All you got to do is a Mono Meadows trailhead, hike in there about an hour and a half, you're in there. So, but what we found is there's a threshold about 9 or 10 years. So if a fire intersects another one and that one burned 9 years or less, in 90% of the cases, it goes out on its own. But as the number of years increase, it burns over the top. So there's incredible evidence in Illilouette Creek that the fire regime was self-regulating. It was able to have that incredible impact by moderating fire behavior at the landscape scale, and it's still doing it today in climate change. So you have this place, Illilouette Creek, and if you have a fire and they're burning, tapestry of burning and the discontinuities, about 10 years, 9 years or so, you intersect that thing, 95% of the cases, it goes out on its own. Amazing. I think that's exactly the way forests in the Sierra used to operate.
thank you. Yes. Oh, thank you guys so much. We're actually going to go ahead and wrap up this section of Q&A. And again, if we didn't ask your questions, please know that we've got 2 designated times for Q&A throughout tonight. And we're going to keep this conversation going. Thank you all so much for I've been reading through all the questions. These are such great questions. And thank you again to our panel members for letting us engage with you a little bit more and to again, participate in this really vital and giant conversation around fire. Now we're going to go ahead and move forward and talk a little bit more about wildfire. And my next question is actually for the audience. So for all of you that are here tonight, I've got another poll question, and I'm curious about, California and, across the world, we've experienced a lot of wildfire, especially within the last 5 to 10 years. And so I'm curious to know, has anybody personally, or maybe you know of anyone that has been affected personally by wildfire? I'm curious to know. So if everybody can take a minute to answer that question, and have you personally, or do you know of anyone that has been affected directly by wildfire? Thank you all for participating and being active members in our conversation. Let's go ahead and publish those results. Wow, yeah. We have 102 participants here right now, and I'm so excited that so many people have joined in this conversation. And about 83% of us have been personally or know someone that has been personally affected by wildfire, which is a lot. It's 60 of us pretty much, or excuse me, about 80 of us. That's a lot. And so, and I think even in just the last 2 years, here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon, we've experienced major wildfire, and wildfire is a real threat and a scary and traumatizing experience. And again, just in the last 2 years, our parks have experienced 2 major wildfires that have resulted in park closures, evacuations of nearby towns, of park staff, of our valued community members, and a lot of trauma for surrounding communities. For me personally, just the last 2 years, I've been evacuated from my home once. I've been placed under evacuation warning. I've lived in hazardous air quality for months, and have had 3 different family members evacuated from their homes for different fires throughout California. And nothing about wildfire is easy, and it's a hard chapter in the kind of the larger story of fire in the Sierra Nevada, but it's definitely a chapter we can't really skim over, especially what we've seen in just the last 2 years here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon. And especially in the light of the last few years, my first question for kind of this next part of our conversation is for Andrew. And Andrew, I'm curious, when we talk about fire suppression and wildfire in Sequoia and Kings Canyon, can you elaborate a little bit more on what we mean when we say wildfire management and what the parks are currently doing to manage wildfire?
Sure. Speaking for wildfire management as the entire approach, it's based on our philosophy from the Organic Act to preserve and protect natural resources, cultural resources, unimpaired, going forward to future generations. So the one part of our philosophy that's not very unique is protecting resources, employees, and the public from unwanted fires. Reducing the threat to local communities, keeping fire in the park, keeping fire out of the park if it's unwanted. So by policy, human starts and some front country lightning, if it's in a terrible spot, it's full suppression. So we have to deal with fires that start in bad spots, or if they're started by a human, we have to put those out. All kinds of strategies go into that. Monitoring, if we don't have the folks, if it's in a hard to get area, point protection, we'll just protect the point, the cabin, the resource, and then there's just full suppression if we can get people to the fire. So most people are accustomed to suppression. We have been since the early 1900s, but our Park Service philosophy emphasizes building and maintaining fire resilient ecosystems using the full range of fuel treatment. So Gary, if you could pop up pics 3 and 4. My feed is a little slow, so I don't know if those are showing up. myself. But what we like to do, what we've been doing since the mid 60s, Scott was talking about, and Christy, was broadcast burning or prescribed fire. So, you know, that was started in Redwood Canyon by Dr. Biswell from Cal, and built some big blocks there in Redwood Canyon, where there was, you know, a few less values, but a tough place to do such a thing. So picture in 3 and 4 up there, you'll see Eric in Cedar Grove dragging fire through a nice ponderosa pine stand. There he is, some cedars in there. And Cedar Grove is where we got ahead of the fire cycle in certain areas. So we got some really high canopies in areas like this and other spots. We got some really mature pine trees that look really good. You can look through a lot of that stuff in Cedar Grove. And there's a picture of Logan in Giant Forest doing our Sherman burns, and he's knocking out some really heavy pockets of fuel around Sequoias. And these played a huge part, these burns that happened in 2019. Greg, if you can go to the next picture. This is just one drop in the bucket for Giant Forest, these burns in here. So this is Giant Forest fire history. These are all past treatments. You're looking at a fire history map of basically the entire grove. The one exception is the southwest corner of the grove hadn't had treatment. Actually, more the middle west corner where it says museum right there. So these past treatments were a gift by past managers. They gave us a safe place to fight fire and to take action and protect our crown jewel in the park. So the next picture, if you could, Greg, is just a picture of that museum area. If that pops up. Oh, that's actually that's Big Stump right there, but that's fine. Those, needless to say, those treatments in Giant Forest. There you go. There's a Giant Forest Museum. So you're looking straight off the museum and the Beetle Rock Education Center, and that's the fire making a really hard push up the Marble Fork. Made folks nervous. It was coming for Giant Forest, but we fought some fire on the nose of the grove right there, and we're able to catch it in a lot of our past treatments. And like Scott was talking about earlier, a lot of the more recent treatments you mentioned, 8 to 10 years, things like that. We had treatments that were a couple years old in Giant Forest, and we didn't have to do anything in those areas. The fire went out. So that was pretty nice, and that's right below the Sherman tree where that happened. So this was before we were engaging in Giant Forest. So thank you to everybody that came before, for sure. And then moving on, another thing we're getting more into these days is manual thinning or restoration thinning. The next picture, that Big Stump picture that we had up earlier, I think it's picture 3 if we have that. There you go. So Big Stump, to really quick, the Big Stump Grove doesn't have any contemporary fire history. It's got a lot of cultural resources. We usually like to do a broadcast, put fire on the ground and let it do its thing. But we had to restore the stand structure first. So we didn't exceed our objectives and essentially kill more of the stand than we wanted to, which is not much. So built a whole bunch of piles over 87 acres, and that picture was from today. We're burning that stuff right now. So a lot of these treatments where you need to restore stuff that's close to infrastructure, you start in the bullseye and you work out, and that's kind of how Giant Forest, we built our own mosaic, right? And then other than that, talking about managed wildfire, if I still got a second, we manage wilderness fires as best we can. Yosemite was at the forefront of that when we were at the forefront of prescribed burning in the 60s. So Yosemite really got that going. And we have a few examples from recent history in the East Fork and things like that. But honestly, to go back to my previous question, we had a full suppression strategy the last couple of years. It had to be a really exceptional time of year to manage wilderness fires. But if it's in an area where it's not threatening, if we can keep the fire activity commensurate with the values and do the resource some good and restore a natural process, we will do that. So you have to have that stuff line up to do it right. And hopefully we get more of those opportunities going forward.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I think, yeah, again, like I love the picture that you paint, that it's, you know, you can say a full suppression strategy, but then there's all these, you know, like that is such, there's all these different strategies from pile burning to prescribed burns. And when we talk about management, and you said the phrase built a mosaic, and I know I'm kind of using it out of turn here a little bit, but you really built that like idea that there's so many of these pieces that come together when we talk about wildfire management. It's, you know, and it really is this conglomerate of all of these things that come together when we talk about fire resistant ecosystems and that goal of building that fire resistant ecosystem. And, you know, transferring over here to Scott. Scott, my next question for you is kind of along that same vein a little bit, and kind of going in a little bit of a different direction. But, you know, we've become accustomed to, you know, these very thick forests. We talked about, you know, previously that, you know, the forests looked a little bit thinner, not as dense, you know, maybe 100, 110 years ago. But you suggest that through wildfire management, you know, as opposed to fire suppression, we can create a structural change within the landscape that not only have the benefits for the forest itself, but also could benefit the watershed. And I was curious if you can elaborate on that idea a little bit more.
No, I'd be happy to. And I think they go hand in hand. You know, you think about California right now, maybe no rain, at least in my part of California, all of February. We might be going through the longest sequential no rain period in the history, at least late 1800s in California for rain. I mean, that gets all our attention, you know, because it's just breathtaking and actually quite scary. So this idea of kind of how water connects to this is really fascinating too. And I'll go to Illilouette Creek Basin, the place I was able to chat with you a moment about some areas that we've been working up there. And if we could, please, Gary, get that picture of the kind of the mosaic of Illilouette Creek, possibly. I think it might be my third slide or something like that. So Illilouette Creek is one of those wilderness areas that Andrew just alluded to, where you're going to able to do some managed fire. And there it is. So there's Yosemite. And you see Illilouette Creek is that little white area. Whoop, it kind of just there. Whoops, there she blows. There's that little white area right there, which is the Illilouette Creek Basin. It's about 45,000 acres. You see that's, you know, Yosemite Valley just to the left of it, and it's the upper Merced Rivershed. And there you see some pictures to the right of just what these managed wildfires have done. So you see some scorch in the foliage. You also see down below a little bit of grass that's been created. Can we go to the next picture, please? And here's 2001 Hoover fire. Ed Duncan took this picture, the FMO at the park at the time. So here you see a lightning fire that's been burning in Illilouette Creek. The Hoover fire is actually one of the larger ones in the area. And you can see there's exposed rock here, and of course forest and other montane chaparral. The next slide, please. Here's a little patch of high severity fire. So we just talked about, yeah, fires kill trees. You know what? That's a good thing. Trees grow too good. So here's a place where we have a small patch of high severity fire. You see the logs on the ground, you see the snags, but you also see regeneration. Most of this is lodgepole pine with some Jeffrey pine. So it's an area in Illilouette Creek, and most high severity patches inside Illilouette Creek since 1972 are about 4 acres or smaller. 4 acres, that's a party. You know, I can live with 4 acre patch of dead trees, and then you can regenerate it, have succession happen, wildlife habitat, all sorts of cool things, right? So it really shows this mosaic of incredible patchiness. And maybe I have one more picture of maybe of a map. Is that available, Gary? The next one, maybe just a map of forest change. Oops. Well, that's okay. Well, the map would have shown, if you looked in 1970, Yosemite did a complete aerial survey, black and white photos. So we actually got those things, and we looked at Illilouette Creek, and there was no fire in Illilouette Creek from a tree ring record from about 1880 to 1972. Suppression had happened in the park, just like everywhere else. But then 1972, the fire came back. And then those fires burning inside that Illilouette Creek area over time has reduced forest area by 22%. I'm not talking about thinning forest from 100 trees per acre to 50. It's literally changed the vegetation type to a wetland, grassland, or shrubland. And it's created a mosaic of these different patches, just like that photo I showed you a second ago. And that's one reason why that system is starting to be self-regulating. And then we brought some hydrologists in to actually try to look at the hydrology. You know what's happened? Since 1972, the amount of water leaving Illilouette Creek as stream water has increased slightly, even with climate change. And we looked at 6 other watersheds next to Illilouette with no fire in similar elevation, similar forest, similar soil. Every one of those things decreased. And we saw only about 10% of the forest mortality in Illilouette during the 2012 to 16 drought versus areas outside. So we see these amazing kind of co-benefits of hydrology. You know, kind of the system working a little bit differently and enabling then maybe things like water and things like streams staying wet longer in climate change for park managers, which is really a big deal. And of course, water going downstream and being used by certainly the environment and people in California. So I think there is some synergy there that could be enabled by this mosaic of burning in these higher watersheds, especially snow-covered watersheds that we've seen up there in Illilouette Creek. And we've actually worked a little bit also in Sugarloaf Creek Valley. Sugarloaf Creek is in Kings Canyon, another place we tried to do some work as well. So I think there really is some synergy of this enabling the fire regime, resiliency going forward. And I think we see some evidence of actually hydrology and water being co-benefits.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, I feel like I have 1,000 questions. But again, yeah, the idea of that mosaic of when, bringing these different things together, that there's the co-benefits of hydrology, something that we don't really hear about when we're talking about fire suppression and wildfire management. And especially now when we have this element of climate change. And when the water has now become a really vital part of this conversation and a part of the fire story. And I think that we get so focused on the drought and so focused on the lack of water, and we don't associate necessarily fire suppression with an increase in a watershed capability. And that's something I loved about recently reading a paper of yours that I hadn't made that connection before, and it's so fascinating. And and Christy, transferring over to you, and when we've heard the phrase climate change a lot in this conversation. And my question for you is kind of, with all of these, you've been managing here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon for a long time. And I'm curious about what substantial changes you have seen in the Southern Sierra Nevada, primarily here in the parks, in the last 10 years as it relates to climate change and large tree mortality. And what do you identify as the largest risk to giant sequoias today?
Yeah, Katie, that's a good question. Gary, if you can pull up some of my photos from the beginning, we'll just run through a few of those really quick. The biggest threat, I think, right now to giant sequoias is clearly high severity fire in terms of its potential to eliminate in a single event large numbers of sequoias. So here we've got a monitoring crew in an area of giant forest that we've been trying to burn in a prescribed burn for 2 years and have not gotten the right burn window. This is an area that's seen repeated fire, and you can see the char on that sequoia in the left, showing that these trees are used to fire, well adapted to fire. But if we go to the next slide, the next photo, this is in Muir Grove, which is a beautiful grove, but with very little to no contemporary fire history. And you can see a much more dense stand condition, lots of low branches on those trunks that have not burned. And this grove actually just burned in the KNP complex. And an amazing hotshot crew actually went out while the fire was racing up slope towards this grove. And they lit a backfire to try and get the fire to back down through the grove and get better fire behavior and less damage. And we think that this grove actually fared pretty well because of that. But if you go to the next slide, this is a portion of the park called Dillonwood that was logged and had contemporary logging history, really thoughtful logging actually in its later years. where the owners very carefully removed some of the intermixed trees, not the sequoias. Initially, it was the sequoias were removed, and so you don't see many large sequoias there, but in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they did very careful selective logging. But because of that and the exclusion of fire, you can see how dense this stand is. These trees are all youngsters, what we call spire tops. And you can see a really dense stand structure there with continuous fuels from the ground to the canopy. And if you go to the next slide, this slide shows a couple things. That tree in the background is actually a tree that was killed by cedar bark beetles during the drought, called Lazarus. And the tree is called Lazarus by some people, not the beetles. But those beetles, this emerging phenomenon of Western cedar bark beetle being able to attack and kill large giant sequoias standing when they are drought stressed and have experienced extensive previous fire damage is also an emerging threat, but one that may become more serious in the future. And we're trying to understand the drivers and how to protect these trees. But the beetles have only taken out about 38 sequoias that we know of, as opposed to high severity wildfire, which we think has killed somewhere on the neighborhood of 13,000 large sequoias. So next slide. This is in Board Camp Grove, which is a grove near the South Fork of the Sequoia that burned at high severity in the Castle Fire of 2020. And one of the things that we saw in this fire that we really did not anticipate, starting in 2015, we started to see, after the drought, which had killed so many other conifers, and we had all this fuel buildup, all these standing dead trees, and we started talking to John Battles and Scott and others about, what does it mean to have all these dead trees on the landscape? You know, what's going to happen to fire behavior? We started to see this, and we saw much smaller scale versions in the Rough Fire, the Pier Fire, and the Railroad Fire. And then the Castle Fire came through and decimated large sections of many groves that did not have recent fire history and had a lot of surrounding tree mortality. They were on really steep slopes. And two things happened that really showed what a threat this was, and built on fears that I think a lot of sequoia forest specialists had for a long time about canopy fire. What would happen if you set up conditions with fuels where fire could get into the canopy? And the two things worth noting here is you can see that the overstory trees, including these large, over 1,000-year-old trees that have survived 80 to 100 previous fires, they're all dead. And those are the trees that make the cones and the seeds that are the future of that sequoia stand. And if you look under Adrian Doss's feet there in the foreground, you can see dirt. And if you go and you really look, there aren't cones and seeds in there. There are very few because they burned in the fire. And so that means that this area, if it's large enough, like Scott was saying, where for sequoias about 600 feet from a living sequoia, this is potential loss of this Eric Grove area, which in this particular grove is over 80% of this grove. And as we're moving into climate change and continued wildfires, we need as much genetic diversity and as many groves scattered across the landscape as we can have, so that there's variation for these stressors to act on, so we can keep these groves into the future. And so this is a very serious concern. So we've got drought stress, we've got novel beetle attack, we've got high severity fire killing about 19% of the population. For giant sequoias, they're a very range limited species, 70 groves or less, only about 25,000 acres range wide. The mature trees, 2,000 years. So that's a really big problem. Gary, can you go one more forward just so I can see what else we got there? Oh yeah, so that's what it should look like. And this is in a different grove, Cedar Flat, on the way to Board Camp, where we got these. That's a sequoia cone with a bunch of little babies there. living life post-fire, and that's what it's supposed to look like. So one other thing I want to end on before we go to the Q&A, the way I think about this is that because of successful fire suppression, we've got 100 years of extra carbon stored on our landscape, and it's coming off. And it's either coming off in wildfire or restorative thinning or prescribed fire or some form of logging or widespread tree mortality, but it's going, and it's up to us to decide how we want it to go. Thanks, Katie.
Christy, thank you. And I think this is where the fire conversation, especially as it relates to giant sequoias, gets very real. And I know for me, when I see those pictures where I see the moonscape, I see, a black monarch sequoia that is just burned. And also the things that I don't see in those pictures, like you had pointed out, there's no cones, there's no seeds. It's terrifying. And, you paint in a, in a very scary way, a really realistic picture. The Sierra Nevada and the giant sequoias are facing drought. They're facing that real threat of high severity fire, the 100 years of extra carbon storage, and in a changing climate where we are still learning what those changes are. And it is a risk. And I'm really excited to get to our next question. But before we do, I know I'm probably not the only one that is feeling a little uneasy, and I want to open it back up to some question and answer time, so people have an opportunity to interact with Scott, Andrew, or Christy. And so again, if you all have any questions, please put those questions into the Q&A box. And to start us off, this question comes from Bill, and he asks, given that the stand structures are now unnatural and therefore more fire prone, what's the best way to manage the forest to return to a more natural state? And I would say whoever wants to take that question. Andrew?
Sure. I think, one of the photos I had was of the Big Stump Grove. Christy talked about Dillonwood, how that logging led to, some unnatural reproduction. It has that same stand structure. And if we went in there and said, let's broadcast burn this and return this back, let's get a first fire entry in there, we'd probably kill most of that stand. Not every tree, but it would not be looking good. We wouldn't meet our objectives. So in areas like that, we have to modify the stand first. We have to cut shade tolerant trees, firs and cedars and things like that to drop that canopy, break up those ladder fuels. Ladder fuels are when the dead and down reach the canopy and they kill the tops of trees or stress them too much. So that's my example. Big stump, we can't just go in there and burn it. On a larger scale, maybe that's the thing, is restorative thinning on a larger scale. Christy and I are trying to get out in Redwood Meadow. There's 3 groves out there that we're trying to thin out in the wilderness that the K&P complex almost got. That drainage isn't safe since the fire's in there. We still have to do something in Redwood Meadow. So we're trying to get out in the wilderness and thin that stand and modify that and then burn it. Because that's all we can do right now.
I might say just one quick thing that maybe Christy, but I got to tip my hat to you and Christy trying to think about bringing in restoration thinning to the wilderness and national parks. I know this is not easy, and I imagine there's several people on the call today right now might be very uncomfortable with that, but you know what? We've got to do something. If you look at these impacts, you look at that fire, the castle. I was in the castle last year myself. It was one of the saddest days in my entire life. When I was walking from big tree to big tree, looking up in the air at a giant barbecue. There was no foliage. The thing was gone. Then I'd walk again, see another. And as Christy said, 1,000-year-old tree probably had 100 fires maybe in its life, and then they get killed in 2 years. This is really a travesty. So I just got to tip my hat to you and at the park to thinking outside the box and trying to do some restoration work. And it's not a timber grab, restoration is about what you leave, it's not what you take. So I'll stop talking, but I have to give you some real kudos because I know that's not easy.
And, another question we have that is kind of along the same vein, it comes from one of our guests named Lanny. He asks, with current climate conditions, is landscape level type like conversion to chaparral just kind of the name of the game right now? He says, wandering around the Sierras with fire history maps, he feels like he has seen so many scars from the last 30 or 40 years that have almost no tree regeneration. And how does, so his question is, how does this compare to historic fire regimes and forest succession? And Scott, I don't know if you want to take that, or Christy?
No, I'm happy to, and others can certainly talk. You got a question that's really a really important one. Because my experience, just like you just said, the North Complex fire, all these fires that are burning in different parts of the Sierra Nevada, if you take that forest ecosystem out, just like Christy showed us, when you don't have seeds for regeneration, there is a seed bank in the soil from the shrubs. That seed bank in the soil will survive and can be viable for 80 years or longer. So the shrubs will come, and these are native species, they're important. But when you get hundreds or thousands of acres continuous with shrub cover, and you get another ignition, it's going to burn high severity again. That's just the nature of that regime. So you've got a question that's spot on. It's very difficult to get out of that loop. Once you get into that loop, man, is it hard to get out. So that means, doing that restoration thinning, doing that burning that we've been chatting about, managed wildfire, doing it ahead of time. That's the place to put your investment, because I think some of those areas, I was in the North Fork of the Feather River this year, the Dixie Fire burned on top of the Story, burned on top of the Chips. We got places now in the North Fork of the Feather River, the Northern Sierra, burned 3 times high severity since 2000. And all they are is shrub fields. And that's probably what they're going to be for a while. So I'm very, very concerned about that. I don't know, Christy, what do you think?
I think you're exactly right, Scott. And the focus, Andrew and I and others, and you've been saying this for years, we have been very concerned, and we've been very focused on keeping what we have. And the problem, as George points out in the chat, none of this happens fast, and wildfire does happen fast. And wildfire is not waiting for us to get our act together. It's hard for us to make the plans. It's hard for us to find a burn window. Climate change is narrowing the burn windows. And I feel like Andrew and I make a great plan, and then before we turn around and a wildfire is burned over it. We had 7 groves that we had made. They were great plans, and they all burned in the KNP. That's only the beginning. Some of those will be good fire effects, like we talked about. A lot of that burned at low to moderate severity, but we really have to look at fuel loading, and like you said, the potential for reburning at high severity. So now our focus is on looking at the groves, what condition are they in, and making these plans, like Andrew said, to reduce fuels and preserve what we have, and where we need to think about restoration.
Right, absolutely. And there's one more question I want to ask before we move on, and I'm going to actually kind of combine 2 questions. And Andrew, this is for you. There's 2 questions that are similar, and it has to do with kind of funding and staffing. And Tom Nichols says specifically, like, what are our planned prescribed fire projects and giant sequoia groves for the next 5 years, and what funding and staffing do you need to carry it out? Because Marcy from Calaveras Big Tree State Park, so who, one of the only state parks that preserves giant sequoias, she asked something similar in that, sometimes the fuel reduction isn't about, the different treatments, but sometimes it comes down to staffing and understaffing. So Andrew, I was curious if you can kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Tom. You're one of the folks I have many thanks to for my giant forest, etc. fire history that has been serving us well in the past. So funding, not to get into all the regional stuff, but we do get the funding when we do get the windows. The tough part is where our burn windows nowadays or lining up with the staffing that we do have. So I believe the staffing has to be stood up to meet those tiny burn windows. One thing I didn't get into earlier was how fire season, if it never ends, then prescribed burn season never begins. So if that comes from outside, if that becomes bolstering the federal workforce to do that, to accommodate that, then that's where I see it going. And there is momentum for the staffing issue, and it's a serious issue. I was up those pictures from Big Stump when I talked to Gary earlier. We were up there burning in Big Stump with 6 people. So it takes the staffing. I have confidence in that getting bolstered. And you do have to take the right opportunities. While we were doing this in Big Stump today, the Sequoia forest was kicking butt down below us in Dark Canyon. They're below the snow line, and they're taking an opportunity. They might be on the extreme cold end of a prescription. They got snowed on 2 days ago, but they're burning, and they're shooting for 700 acres. So it takes, once those two things do line up, then I'll think we'll be on our way. I'm not gonna, you never say we're looking good, but you're on our way to what you need to just do it. That's a start.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrew. We're going to go ahead and move on to our last questions for our panelists, and going to start kind of wrapping up our evening. But before we move on to our last question for our panelists, I have another question for our audience. And we've learned so much over the last hour and have really, I think, gotten a really in-depth glimpse of fire and the story of fire in the Sierra Nevada and what we're up against and what we've learned from. And I'm curious, in all your opinions who are on the call, is what do you, as you guys have listened to the talk, what do you see as the main threat to the Sierra Nevada and the giant sequoias? So if you guys can take a minute to answer this question, again, what do you see as the main threat to the Sierra Nevada and giant sequoias? You can choose one or all. All right, we'll give everybody just a minute to answer that question. Again, what do you see as the main threat to the Sierra Nevada and giant sequoias? All right, Gary, let's go ahead and publish those results. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good. All of the above. But yes, climate change, wildfire, drought, bark beetle, all of those things. Christy elaborated earlier. There's a lot that that is threatening the Sierra Nevada and the giant sequoias. But I also think, Scott has mentioned this, and Andrew, and everybody has kind of mentioned this idea of hope and what's, that there are things that can happen, and that, Andrew was just like singing the praises of, the Forest Service that's burning right now. There are people that are actively today making positive changes for the future. Andrew was burning in Big Stump today. The Forest Service is burning just below them. And there are these actions that people can take every single day to help combat, even though these problems seem so big, there are things that we can do to continue the health of our giant sequoias. And about 6 or 8 months ago, I had the opportunity to listen to Christy talk about the current threat to giant sequoias in the wake of the Castle Fire. And this was before even the KMP fire was a thing, before that happened. And she said something that I haven't really been able to get out of my head since then. And she said that one of the real problems that we're facing is the protection and preservation of the remaining monarch sequoias. And I think when we talk about giant sequoias, we kind of canopy the giant sequoias, but just like the picture behind me and the picture behind Christy, there's this concept of the monarch sequoias. And when we say monarch sequoia, we're talking about anything that has greater than 4 feet in diameter. And our last question of the evening focuses kind of on this really real problem. And I have the same question for each panelist. So if each panelist can take about 5 minutes or so to answer this, or maybe about 3 minutes to answer, is, in the last 2 years, 15 to 20% of the planet Earth's monarch giant sequoias have been destroyed by wildfire. What can we do to ensure the survival of the remaining sequoias and the continued health of the Sierra Nevada forests?
Okay,
we'll start with Christy.
And I'll be quick because this is something I think about every day. So the first thing I'll say is that these trees are already helping us. They are some of the most resilient and fire adapted organisms on Earth. They have already picked the best places on the landscape to live, the wettest places. They just need a little help. And hope for me comes from acting in the face of uncertainty. It is uncertain what wildfire will come next. It is uncertain how severe climate change will be. So we just need to help. These trees have been around for 2,000 years. They've survived previous droughts. They've survived previous wildfires. I love them because they are big and shaggy and old, and they make me think about what it's like to live for 2,000 years. They're tough. They only need us to stop kicking them in the teeth. So whatever you can do to act to reduce climate change and whatever you can do to support active forest management, it is not easy. The smoke from prescribed burning is not great. Better than wildfire, but it's not great. And we don't like to mess with things sometimes, right? But those days are over. We need to actively manage our forests in and around sequoia groves and old growth mixed conifer to keep the values that we want and to preserve the landscape that the plants and animals have evolved with. So there's a lot of hope there, and people love these trees. So just take your love and do what you can to support active forest management and to reduce the impact of climate change. And the trees will take it from there.
I love that. Yes, exactly. We just need a little bit of help. So Scott and Andrew, either one, same question. What do you think that we can do to ensure the survival of the remaining monarch sequoias and the continued health of the Southern Sierra Nevada?
I don't have any notes. I don't have any notes for this one. So to tag off to what Christy said, you know, wildfire smoke versus prescribed fire smoke. Prescribed fire smoke is such a drop in the bucket. And they say you just need to remember this stuff. Don't forget. If your neighbor says, "Oh, what the heck are they doing up there?" It's, you know, there's a haze in the air that's going to lift by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's smoky in the morning, and then it lifts. That's probably prescribed fire smoke. Can't complex drainage is like the Middle Fork. That thing holds smoke like nothing I've ever seen. So just don't forget what it takes. And the folks that did those burns in giant forests in the East Fork and in Redwood Canyon, they did that at a time when there was so much more scrutiny in the 80s and 90s, and they just did it. So land managers just need to be unapologetic when it comes to that kind of stuff. And when we put smoke in the air and it goes down canyon, we not to be unapologetic might be kind of blunt, but we need to use those. We can sometimes we put a lot of smoke in the air, but you need to use those moments to educate on what's really happening and what we're treating. When I moved out here from Minnesota, I saw a sequoia tree for the first time. I got a job for the Forest Service, and it happened to be in Sequoia National Forest. And I didn't have any idea of what I was in for, honestly, and what I was protecting. So pretty damn cool. So just pass it on. That's a prescribed burn, it's smoky. Oh, well, what's the goal? You know, these things will still be here when we're gone. So.
Thank you, Andrew. I love that. I love that message of don't forget. And even, being so close, like here in the park, like it is sometimes it is easy to forget that. And thank you I think that there is a lot of value in memory And Scott, to you, same
Mhm.
question. What do you think?
Well, I just have to agree with both the panelists and their passion. We're lucky to have people that are passionate about what they're doing. And there you got two of them right there. So that gives a lot of hope. It really does. And also you, Katie, I can see your passion about your stuff as well. I think a couple of things got touched on is the idea of nimbleness. If you're going to start doing prescribed fire at scale in this state, especially things like climate change, the idea that Andrew just talked about, taking your windows when they are available. But do you have a workforce to do it? I was talking to some friends this year because of the fire season. In a 6-month position in fire season, they had more overtime than regular time. They had basically, think about that. Your regular 40-hour-a-week job, these folks had worked over 80, and they did it for 6 months continuous. They were exhausted. So I wonder, are we going to need another workforce, maybe more of a restoration workforce, maybe to augment kind of our current capabilities? Because we just can't say, oh, we just can pay the firefighters year round. Well, good grief, they're almost working year round in 6 months. So I think a workforce is going to be key, and also the nimbleness that got talked about a moment ago. I think that's really, really important. Another thing is, the research supports what the park is doing. It supports restoration thinning. It supports prescribed fire. It supports wildland fire use. It shows that these things work. So it's not as if somehow we're doing something off the rails. We're not doing anything off the rails. So that's a good thing too, so that's powerful. And I guess the last thing I might say is we got to have a little space to make a few mistakes. If you go in thinking that you're never going to make a mistake, holy Toledo. I was on a prescribed fire at our Blodgett Forest Research Station, mixed conifer, the Northern Sierra, last May. So we're burning in May about 4,000 feet. And it turned out there was a low pressure system going across the Modoc that we thought wouldn't impact us. And it came a little south and it actually impacted us. So all of a sudden our humidities went crazy, our wind direction and everything went wrong. We had 10 spot fires in 30 minutes and we had to go to full suppression. And luckily we were able to catch it. It was sometime get your attention. So it just means, when we start doing this work at scale, we're going to make some mistakes. And unfortunately, some mistakes might be bigger than others. Do we have the public and maybe political support to continue? Because you can imagine someone just says, it's over. And you know what? As Christy and Andrew just said, the other option is basically a disaster. So can we actually enable ourselves also to have enough capacity in ourselves and our institutions and the way we work with our institutions to allow managers like Christy and Andrew to go forward, do good work, make a few mistakes once in a while, and still move. We cannot somehow figure out that, oh, we got to do a 10-year study. And by the way, by then we're going to basically figure this out. No, Christy's right. And so is Andrew. It's time to get to work in earnest.
Absolutely. I think, gosh, I think Dr. Stevens, like you say such an important thing, like it really is, there's so much to learn, and that there is, it's hard to, especially learning within a constantly changing environment, and how, sometimes we need that patience and that space for mistakes, and the support for the research, and a workforce that, you had said something funny that, some people, work a year within 6 months. And, I just saw in the chat, fire season started. There's a 3,900 acre fire in Owens Valley that started I think it started today or yesterday. And so we're here. It's February and we're seeing fire, and it is, there is a lot that we can do. And I love everybody's message of supporting active forest management, supporting climate change initiatives, not forgetting conversations like this, and interacting. And it's one thing I love about Giant Conversations, that we can interact with our national parks in a way that, moves a conversation forward, moves ideas forward. And we can be unapologetic for that, like Andrew was saying, of, trying and doing our best and going out there and doing what we can to help. And Christy also said, again, like, we need to stop kicking the trees in the teeth. And there are different ways that we can do that. And I want to say thank you to everybody for being part of that solution just by joining the conversation today, and asking questions and contributing and listening to these experts, and all your support in the chat. And I do want to open it up for a couple more questions. We've got about 5 minutes for some more questions. And so please ask your questions in the Q&A box. I've got a fun question for one of our young panel, or one of our young participants. His name's Calvin, and it's for Andrew. Andrew, Calvin, age 13, wants to know, how do you start the controlled burns?
Hey, Calvin, thanks for asking. When we start a controlled burn, we work with folks in Christy's side of the park and make sure we're meeting our resource objectives. Those objectives are a certain fire intensity. Are we consuming the fuel that we want? Is the fire doing what we want? Is it moving fast? Is it moving too fast? Is it moving too slow? So we do a test fire. So we have a burn boss. He's in charge of the whole burn. Everybody. He's in charge of his firing boss, his holding boss, his information officer. And he says, start that test fire, firing boss. And they'll burn. Sometimes a test fire will take 4 hours. We'll look at it. We'll get our fire effects monitors to look at it, and they'll record stuff that's over my head. But they'll write down how tall the flame lengths are, the fuel consumption, how fast it's moving, and then they'll check with their burn boss and they'll give them the thumbs up. And once the test fire is successful, then the burn has really begun, and then they can continue doing that. Sometimes a test fire is 1 acre, sometimes it's 10, and then they'll keep going. And the next day they'll do the same thing over and over again because the weather changes, humidities, winds, all that stuff. So they make sure they're still doing everything right.
Thanks, Andrew. And we've got a lot of questions in the chat about the K&P fire. And so, Christy, I'm curious if you can give just kind of a brief summary of the impact of the K&P fire on here in the parks in Sequoia and Kings.
Yeah, I'll try and be slightly rational and not let the trauma of the experience. K&P burned 88,000 acres, most of it in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. Honestly, we got lucky. We had a lot of inversion during that time. It burned through a lot of areas that had not seen recent fire, burned through a lot of groves, 16 groves, many of which had not seen recent fire or any fire at all. And we walked away with very little high severity. High severity is what we really worry about. It's those patches that we talked about where the canopy is 75 to 100% removed. That said, there's 350 acres of high severity in Redwood Mountain Grove on our property that we think is too far from an intact canopy edge to potentially regenerate on its own. We've got about 3,000 acres of mixed conifer in different patch sizes that we think won't regenerate on its own, and we'll be looking at those. We'll also be looking at the other areas that burned at low and moderate severity and saying, hey, did we get beneficial effects here? And how can we build off that? It takes more than one fire to restore resilience. So what can Andrew and I and the other fire and resources staff do to build off what the K&P did, to keep working towards resilience and wildfire resilience? So a lot of good impacts. If you haven't been in the park, you should come check it out. You will see some areas that if you're a tree lover like me, there's a little too many dead trees in there. So we'll be looking at that and looking at how to move it forward in the good places and the bad places.
Thank you so much, Christy. And thank you to all of our panel members and our participants. Believe it or not, it's already 7:30. It's the end of our conversation tonight. But before we say goodbye for the night, I just want to say thank you so much to Dr. Stevens, Dr. Brigham, and Andrew. Thank you guys so much for sharing your knowledge and your passion. And I love how evident your passion for these forests and the trees and the Sierra Nevada and fire is. Fire is such a complex story, and you guys have brought it to life for us and have introduced us to not just the scary thing about fire, but you've helped us to understand how fire really is a complex story. And I think that the best way that we can continue to move forward is by understanding that story. And you have helped us all understand the story of fire in these parks better. And so thank you so much for your time and for your hard work and your dedication. And to all of you that participated in the giant conversation tonight, I can't say thank you enough for for joining. This is definitely our most attended conversation so far. And like we stated at the beginning, national parks are a place where not only you can have solitude right next to a giant sequoia or at the bottom of Kings Canyon, but they are a place where a conversation can happen. And I want to say thank you all so much for taking time out of your evenings to interact with your parks in a different way tonight and to join in the conversation. And in the spirit of Andrew, I hope that you guys don't forget this conversation and you are able to share the story of fire with those around you. So thank you all so much for coming. Now, if you are enjoyed our conversation today, or if you just flat out love Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, there are a lot of ways that you can continue to connect with us. And we're going to paste some stuff in the chat. So if you are interested in the work that is happening here in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks and the work of the Sequoia Parks Conservancy, please feel free to hang out with us a little bit more. You can join our newsletter. You can follow us on Instagram or Facebook. We would love to get to know you a little bit more and continue the conversation. So there's lots of ways for you to keep interacting with us after tonight. So thank you again, everybody. And we hope to see you at the next giant conversation.